The rain fell softly outside the tall windows of Le Ciel, one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. Inside, crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over white tablecloths and polished silverware. Jasmine Williams moved gracefully between tables, balancing a tray of champagne flutes with practiced ease. At 28, she had mastered the art of being both visible when needed and invisible when not, a skill essential for surviving in the high-end service industry. "Excuse me," she said quietly, setting down a glass next to a woman in a shimmering blue dress. "Your champagne, ma'am." The woman barely looked up from her conversation. Jasmine stepped back, straightening her black vest over her crisp white shirt. Her uniform was simple but elegant, designed to blend into the restaurant's refined atmosphere. As she returned to the kitchen, Jasmine caught her reflection in one of the large mirrors that lined the walls. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, her posture perfect after years of piano lessons with her grandmother insisting she sit straight. Those memories made her smile slightly, thinking of the hours spent at the old upright piano in their small apartment. "Table 12 needs their check," called Raymond, the floor manager, interrupting her thoughts. He was a thin man with a perpetual frown who ran the dining room with military precision. "Right away," Jasmine replied, quickly tucking away the memories and focusing on her work. Le Ciel had opened 3 years ago and quickly became the place to be seen for the city's elite. The owner, Mr. Chen, had spared no expense, including installing a gorgeous grand piano in the corner of the main dining room. Occasionally, they hired musicians for special events, but most nights the piano sat silent, more decoration than instrument. Jasmine often found her eyes drawn to it during quiet moments. Her fingers would itch with the desire to play, to feel the smooth keys beneath her fingertips again. But those dreams had been set aside when her grandmother passed away and reality came knocking with bills and responsibilities. "Your check, sir?" she said, placing the leather folder discreetly on table 12. The businessman nodded without looking up from his phone. The night continued like most others, a rhythm of orders taken, dishes served, and empty plates cleared. Jasmine moved through it all with efficiency, her mind sometimes drifting to the community college music class she would teach tomorrow morning. It wasn't the concert career she had once dreamed of, but helping neighborhood kids discover music brought its own joy. Near the end of her shift, the kitchen doors swung open with force as Luis, the head chef, emerged wiping his hands on his apron. "Jasmine, phone call for you, it's about Zoe," he said, his voice carrying concern. Jasmine felt her heart drop. Zoe was her younger sister, currently in her second year of college, the first person in their family to attend university. Jasmine had been helping with tuition, working double shifts and teaching on the side to make it happen. "Thanks, Luis," she said, hurrying to the small office in the back. The call was brief, but troubling. Zoe's scholarship had been reduced for the upcoming semester, leaving them short by nearly $2,000. Jasmine listened carefully, jotting down details on a notepad, her mind already calculating how many extra shifts she would need to pick up. "I understand. Yes, I'll figure something out," she told the university administrator before hanging up. She allowed herself just 30 seconds to close her eyes and breathe deeply before straightening her shoulders and returning to the dining room. Personal problems had no place on the floor of Le Ciel. As she emerged, she noticed a new group being seated at one of her tables, a party of 6 led by a man in an expensive tailored suit. Even from across the room, Jasmine could tell he was someone accustomed to power. His laugh was too loud for the restaurant's hushed atmosphere, his gestures commanding attention. "That's Richard Thornton," whispered Anna, another server who had worked the lunch shift. "Real estate developer. Owns half the buildings downtown. Is he a good tipper?" Jasmine asked practically. Anna shrugged. "Depends on his mood." "Good luck." Jasmine approached the table with her professional smile in place. "Good evening. Welcome to Le Ciel. My name is Jasmine, and I'll be taking care of you tonight." Richard Thornton glanced up at her, his eyes barely registering her presence before returning to his companions. "Bring us your best champagne. The 08 Crystal, if you have it." "Certainly, sir. Would you like to hear about our specials this evening?" Jasmine asked. "If we wanted to know, we'd ask," he replied dismissively, turning back to his guests. Jasmine nodded and stepped away, maintaining her composure. She had dealt with plenty of difficult customers before. This was nothing new. The evening progressed, and it became clear that Thornton's table would be challenging. They ordered expensive wines, sent back dishes for minor imperfections, and spoke to her as if she were merely an extension of the furniture. The conversation at their table revolved around a new development project, with Thornton clearly trying to impress the others, potential investors, Jasmine guessed. During a quiet moment while the table was enjoying their main courses, Jasmine found herself near the piano again. Without thinking, she ran a finger lightly along its polished surface, careful not to leave a mark. "You play?" asked Mr. Chen, who had emerged from his office to check on the evening service. Jasmine pulled her hand back quickly. "I used to. A long time ago." Mr. Chen smiled kindly. He was in his 60s, with salt and pepper hair and a gentle demeanor that belied his sharp business sense. "My mother insisted on lessons from the time I could reach the keys," Jasmine continued, surprising herself with the admission. "She said music was the one thing no one could ever take away from you." "Smart woman," Mr. Chen nodded. "Why did you stop?" Jasmine glanced around to make sure none of her tables needed her. "Life happened. Grandmother got sick. Bills piled up. No time for practice when you're working 2 jobs." Mr. Chen seemed about to say something more when Raymond signaled urgently from across the room. Thornton's table was demanding attention. "Duty calls," Jasmine said with a small smile, turning away from the piano and the conversation. As she approached Thornton's table, she could feel a shift in the atmosphere. The men were louder now, the effects of expensive alcohol evident in their flushed faces and boisterous laughter. "Finally," Thornton said when she arrived. "We've been waiting for dessert menus for 10 minutes. It had been 3 minutes at most, but Jasmine simply apologized and distributed the menus with efficiency. "And what is that beautiful instrument doing gathering dust?" Thornton continued, gesturing toward the piano. "Doesn't anyone play in this overpriced establishment?" "We have musicians on weekends, sir," Jasmine explained. "I can ask if you'd like some music with your dessert." One of the other men at the table laughed. "Richard here fancies himself quite the pianist. Studied at Juilliard for a year before his father made him join the family business." Thornton waved a hand dismissively. "Ancient history, though I doubt anyone here would recognize real talent if they heard it." His eyes settled on Jasmine with a calculating look. "What about you, waitress? Do you appreciate fine music?" The question felt like a trap, but Jasmine answered honestly. "I do, sir. Classical especially. Is that so?" Thornton raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "And what would someone like you know about classical music?" The table grew quiet, the implication in his tone hanging in the air. Jasmine felt her cheeks warm but kept her expression neutral. "I studied piano for 15 years, she said simply. "My grandmother was a music teacher." Thornton looked genuinely surprised for a moment before his expression shifted to amusement. He exchanged glances with his companions, and Jasmine could tell her answer had somehow made her the subject of an unspoken joke. 15 years? "Well, isn't that something," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Perhaps we should have you play for us instead of ordering dessert." Jasmine felt a familiar knot form in her stomach, the same feeling she got whenever someone underestimated her based on her appearance or job. But she thought of Zoe and the tuition bill, of the extra shifts she'd need to pick up. "I'm afraid that's not part of my job description," she replied politely. "Now, have you decided on dessert?" As she took their orders, Jasmine could feel Thornton's eyes on her, calculating something. She hurried back to the kitchen, hoping the rest of their evening would pass without incident. But as she arranged delicate chocolate creations on a tray, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The piano that had been a silent companion for so long suddenly felt like a challenge waiting to be met. And Richard Thornton's dismissive glance had awakened something she had tried to keep, dormant for years, her pride in the music that had once been the center of her world. Little did she know that the grand piano sitting in the corner would soon become the stage for a confrontation that would change the course of her life. The dessert service at Thornton's table went smoothly enough, though Jasmine could feel the man's eyes following her as she moved around the restaurant. She tried to focus on her other tables, giving each guest the attention they deserved, but an uneasy feeling had settled in her stomach. When she returned with the check for Thornton's table, he was in the middle of a loud story about a business rival's failure. His companions laughed on cue, their voices carrying across the otherwise quiet dining room. "Your check, sir," Jasmine said, placing the leather folder discreetly at Thornton's elbow. He ignored it, continuing his story without acknowledging her presence. Jasmine waited a respectful moment before stepping back, knowing that hovering would only irritate him further. As she turned to leave, Thornton suddenly reached out and caught her wrist. The gesture wasn't rough, but it was unexpected and inappropriate. Jasmine froze, her professional mask momentarily slipping to reveal her surprise. "I'm not finished with you yet," Thornton said, his voice carrying a hint of challenge. He released her wrist and leaned back in his chair. "Tell me more about this piano playing of yours." The other guests at the table exchanged glances. One man in a navy suit looked uncomfortable, while a woman with diamond earrings seemed amused by the situation. "There's not much to tell, sir," Jasmine replied evenly. "It was a long time ago." 15 years of study isn't something you just forget, Thornton pressed. He gestured toward the grand piano in the corner. "That's a Steinway, you know. Probably costs more than you make in a year." The woman with the diamonds laughed softly. "Richard, don't be cruel." But Thornton wasn't deterred. "I'm not being cruel. I'm being curious." He turned back to Jasmine. "What was the most challenging piece you ever mastered?" "Chopsticks?" A few of his companions chuckled. But Jasmine noticed that not everyone at the table seemed comfortable with the direction the conversation had taken. "Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3, she answered, quietly. Thornton's eyebrows rose slightly, the first genuine reaction she'd seen from him. Impressive claim. "That's considered one of the most difficult pieces in the classical repertoire." "Yes, sir. It is." The man in the navy suit leaned forward, seeming interested despite himself. "Did you perform it publicly?" "Once," Jasmine said, memories flooding back. "At a competition when I was 17. I placed second, Thornton repeated, his tone suggesting that her story was growing less believable by the moment. "Not first?" Jasmine allowed herself a small smile. The winner went on to Juilliard. She was exceptional. Something flickered across Thornton's face. Recognition, perhaps, of her subtle reference to his own past. He drummed his fingers on the table, studying her with new interest. "You know," he said after a moment, "I've had a long day of meetings, and what I could really use is some entertainment." He glanced meaningfully at the piano. "Why don't you play something for us?" The request hung in the air. Jasmine looked around the restaurant, noticing that several other diners had turned to watch the exchange. Raymond, the floor manager, had also taken notice and was hovering nearby, clearly uncertain whether to intervene. "I'm sorry, sir, but I'm working," Jasmine said, keeping her voice professional. Thornton reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a money clip. He peeled off several large bills and set them on the table with deliberate slowness. "There, consider. You're self-compensated for a private performance." The amount was substantial, enough to make a significant dent in Zoe's tuition shortfall. But the way he presented it, like tossing scraps to a street performer, made Jasmine's pride flare. "That's very generous. But I'm afraid I must decline," she said, her voice steady despite the anger building inside her. Thornton's expression hardened. "Are you refusing a direct request from a customer?" "Richard," the uncomfortable man in the navy suit interrupted. "Let it go. She's just trying to do her job." "Her job is to provide service," Thornton replied without taking his eyes off Jasmine. "And I'm requesting a service." Mr. Chen appeared at Jasmine's side, his expression calm but his eyes alert. "Is there a problem here?" he asked pleasantly. Thornton looked up at the restaurant owner. "No problem at all. I was just requesting some entertainment from your staff, who claims to be a classically trained pianist." He gestured to the piano. "That beautiful instrument is going to waste." Mr. Chen looked at Jasmine, a question in his eyes. She gave a barely perceptible shake of her head. "I apologize, Mr. Thornton, but our staff members are not required to perform musical numbers," Mr. Chen said diplomatically. "However, I'd be happy to arrange for a pianist this weekend if you'd like to return." Thornton's smile didn't reach his eyes. "That's not what I want. I want to hear her play, now." He looked directly at Jasmine. Unless, of course, the whole story about being classically trained was just that, a story. A hush had fallen over the nearby tables. Jasmine could feel the eyes of other diners and staff on her. The challenge in Thornton's voice was unmistakable, and the implication clear. He believed she was lying. Mr. Chen cleared his throat. Perhaps we should— It's fine, Jasmine interrupted, surprising herself. I'll play one piece. Mr. Chen looked concerned. Jasmine, you don't have to do this. But she had already made up her mind. Something about Thornton's smug certainty that she was lying, that someone like her couldn't possibly have the training she claimed, had pushed her past the point of professional restraint. One piece, she repeated, looking directly at Thornton. And then I returned to my duties. Thornton settled back in his chair, victorious. Wonderful. Entertain us, then. The woman with diamond earrings clapped her hands together. Oh, this should be interesting. Jasmine untied her server's apron and handed it to Mr. Chen. She smoothed her black vest and straightened her shoulders as she walked toward the piano. Each step felt both terrifying and inevitable, like walking toward a cliff edge but knowing you had wings that hadn't been used in years. The restaurant had grown quiet, conversations dying down as people realized something unusual was happening. Jasmine could feel sweat forming on her palms, a familiar sensation from her competition days. She wiped them discreetly on her pants before reaching the piano. The bench felt both foreign and familiar as she sat down. She adjusted it slightly, muscle memory taking over despite the years away from a proper instrument. She lifted the fallboard to reveal the keys, pristine white and black, waiting patiently. For a moment she hesitated. It had been so long. What if her fingers failed her? What if Thornton was right to mock her? She closed her eyes briefly, hearing her grandmother's voice in her head. Music isn't about them. It's about what lives inside you. Jasmine opened her eyes and placed her hands on the keys. The cool ivory felt like greeting an old friend. Without looking back at Thornton's table, she began to play. She chose Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, not the most technically challenging piece, but one that required soul, one that would allow her fingers to remember their purpose. The first notes floated into the air, tentative at first, like a person testing water before diving in. As she played, the years of absence fell away. Her fingers found their strength and certainty with each measure. The music filled the restaurant, wrapping around the tables and chandelier, reaching into corners where conversation had previously dominated. Jasmine didn't need to look at the keys. Her body remembered what her mind had filed away. She let herself be carried by the gentle rise and fall of the melody, the left hand providing steady support while the right hand told the story. She was vaguely aware of movement in her peripheral vision, servers pausing with trays in hand, diners turning in their seats to watch. But she didn't look up. This moment wasn't about them. It wasn't even about Thornton anymore. It was about reconnecting with the part of herself she had reluctantly set aside. As the final notes of the nocturne faded, Jasmine kept her hands on the keys for a moment longer, unwilling to break the spell. Then reality rushed back. She was still in Le Ciel, still in her server's uniform, still in the middle of her shift. She stood and turned to face the restaurant, bracing herself for Thornton's response. To her surprise, the entire dining room burst into applause. Genuine smiles and appreciative nods came from tables where guests had barely acknowledged her existence all evening. At Thornton's table, reactions were mixed. The woman with diamond earrings was clapping enthusiastically. The man in the navy suit looked pleasantly surprised. But Thornton himself sat with his arms crossed, his expression a complicated mix of disbelief and annoyance. That was lovely, the woman said. Simply lovely. A parlor piece, Thornton dismissed with a wave of his hand. Any second-year student could manage it. The man in the navy suit frowned. Come on, Richard. Give credit where it's due. But Thornton wasn't finished. He leaned forward, eyes locked on Jasmine. If you're as good as you claim, play something really challenging. Something that would separate the amateurs from the professionals. Jasmine knew she should walk away. She had fulfilled his request, proven her point. But the dismissal in his tone, the refusal to acknowledge her skill, sparked something defiant in her. Mr. Chen stepped toward her, concern evident on his face. Jasmine, you've done more than enough. Your other tables— I can cover her tables, Anna offered, appearing at Mr. Chen's side. Let her play. Jasmine looked at Mr. Chen, a question in her eyes. After a moment's hesitation, he nodded. She turned back to Thornton. One more piece, she said, her voice stronger now. And then this ends. Thornton gestured toward the piano with exaggerated graciousness. By all means. As Jasmine sat down at the piano again, she knew exactly what she would play. Her fingers hovered over the keys for just a moment before she launched into the opening cadenza of Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue. The bold, climbing clarinet glissando, translated to piano, sliced through the restaurant air like a declaration of war. The opening notes of Rhapsody in Blue climbed through the air like a question mark, bold and unmistakable. Jasmine felt the music take over, her fingers finding their way across the keys with growing confidence. This was no gentle nocturne. This was Gershwin's masterpiece, a perfect blend of classical structure and jazz freedom, a piece that demanded both technical skill and emotional intelligence. As she moved into the main theme, she glanced up briefly. The entire restaurant had gone still. Servers stood frozen with trays in hand. Diners had set down their forks and turned in their seats. Even the kitchen staff had emerged to listen, standing in a small cluster by the swinging doors. And there was Thornton, his posture no longer relaxed and dismissive. He sat forward in his chair, his eyes narrowed slightly as he watched her hands move across the keyboard. The challenge in his eyes was still there, but now mixed with something else. Surprise, perhaps, or the first hint of doubt. Jasmine looked back at the piano and surrendered completely to the music. Her fingers flew through the difficult passages, dancing across the keys with precision that belied her years away from serious practice. The piece's famous runs and trills poured from her hands as if she had played them yesterday, not a decade ago. She had always loved this piece. Its audacity, its refusal to be easily categorized. Neither purely classical nor purely jazz, it existed in its own category, defying expectations just as she was doing now. The familiar ache began in her shoulders and wrists, her body remembering the physical demands of playing at this level. But the discomfort felt good, like greeting an old friend. When she reached the tender, bluesy middle section, she allowed herself to add subtle interpretations that were entirely her own. This wasn't a competition piece anymore. This was her statement, her voice through Gershwin's notes. She softened certain phrases, lingered over blue notes, added the slightest swing to others, small changes that made the piece unmistakably hers. A memory surfaced as she played, her grandmother standing behind her at their old upright piano, gently correcting her posture. Music isn't just in your fingers, she would say. It's in your whole body, your whole heart. Jasmine let that teaching guide her now, playing not just with technical accuracy, but with everything she had buried away for years. As the piece built toward its climax, she was only dimly aware of the growing reaction in the room. Someone gasped when she executed a particularly difficult passage. A whispered incredible floated from somewhere to her right, but she remained focused on the conversation between her hands and the piano, a dialogue that had been interrupted for too long. The final section of the piece approached, the triumphant return of the main theme, no longer questioning but boldly asserting itself. Jasmine poured every ounce of energy into the crescendo, her hands stretching to reach the wide intervals, her body swaying slightly with the rhythm. When she struck the final chords, the sound resonated through the entire restaurant, powerful and conclusive. For a moment after the last note faded, there was complete silence. Jasmine sat still, her hands resting on the keys, her breathing slightly ragged from the exertion. Then someone began to clap, and suddenly the entire restaurant erupted in applause and cheers. People stood from their tables, napkins still in laps, glasses of wine forgotten. Jasmine finally looked up, taking in the scene with a mixture of shock and joy. This wasn't the polite applause from earlier. This was a genuine ovation. She rose from the bench on slightly shaky legs and gave a small, uncertain bow. Her eyes found Thornton's table. The woman with diamond earrings was on her feet, clapping enthusiastically. The man in the navy suit was nodding with obvious appreciation, and Thornton himself sat motionless, his expression unreadable, his hands resting on the table in front of him. Mr. Chen approached the piano, beaming with pride as if he had discovered her talent himself. "Ladies and gentlemen," he addressed the dining room, "that was Jasmine Williams, one of our fine staff members at Le Ciel." The introduction only increased the applause. As the noise began to die down, Jasmine moved to return to her duties, wanting to escape the spotlight now that the music had ended. But her path took her past Thornton's table, and he stood as she approached. "Wait," he said, his voice lacking its earlier condescension. Jasmine paused, unsure what to expect. The restaurant had largely returned to its normal buzz of conversation, though many people were still watching them with interest. Thornton seemed to be searching for words. An unusual position for a man who always appeared so certain. Unexpected. Coming from him, it was as close to a compliment as she was likely to get. Jasmine simply nodded, not trusting herself to speak without letting her emotions show. The performance had unlocked something in her, a flood of memories, regrets, and questions about paths not taken. "Where did you study?" he asked, his tone genuinely curious now. "I didn't," Jasmine replied. "Not formally beyond high school. My grandmother taught me until I was 15. Then I worked with a teacher at the community center who had studied at Curtis." Thornton looked genuinely confused. "But with that level of talent, life happens," she said simply, echoing what she had told Mr. Chen earlier. "Choices get made. Some things get put aside." The woman with diamond earrings touched Thornton's arm. "Richard, stop interrogating her." "That was beautiful, dear," she said to Jasmine. "Truly special." "Thank you," Jasmine replied, the words feeling inadequate. A commotion near the entrance drew their attention. A small group had just entered the restaurant, not diners based on their casual attire, but visitors who had been attracted by the music. Among them was an older woman in a tailored pantsuit, her silver hair cut in a stylish bob. She was speaking intently with the host, who kept gesturing apologetically toward the reservations-only sign. "I believe someone heard you from outside," the navy suit man observed. Mr. Chen hurried over to handle the situation. After a brief conversation, he led the silver-haired woman into the dining room, directly toward their group. The woman's eyes never left Jasmine. "Ms. Williams," Mr. Chen said formally, "this is Eleanor Reed. She would like to speak with you." Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. Even she knew that name. Eleanor Reed was a legendary producer and talent scout, responsible for launching several major classical and jazz careers over the past 30 years. "Ms. Reed," she managed, extending her hand. "It's an honor." Eleanor Reed's handshake was firm, her gaze direct and assessing. "I was having dinner across the street when I heard the piano. I thought they must have hired someone new to perform." She glanced at Jasmine's server uniform. "Clearly I was mistaken." "I'm just filling in," Jasmine said, feeling strangely self-conscious. "I don't usually play." "That's a crime," Eleanor replied bluntly. She reached into her purse and extracted a business card. "Call my office tomorrow. We should talk." Jasmine stared at the card, unable to fully process what was happening. About what exactly? About why someone who plays Gershwin like that is serving overpriced dinners instead of making music. Eleanor's tone was matter-of-fact, but not unkind. "Talent like yours doesn't come along every day. I'd like to hear more." Before Jasmine could respond, a commotion erupted from the kitchen. The double doors swung open violently as Luis, the head chef, burst through, his white coat stained with what looked like red wine. "Fire!" he shouted. "Everyone out! Fire in the kitchen!" The restaurant exploded into motion. Diners jumped from their seats, grabbing purses and jackets. Servers rushed to help elderly guests. Mr. Chen hurried toward the kitchen, shouting orders to his staff. "This way," Jasmine said automatically, gesturing toward the main exit. Years of mandatory safety training kicked in as she helped guide people toward the doors. Through the chaos, she lost sight of Eleanor Reed. The business card remained clutched in her hand as she directed people to safety, counting her tables in her head to make sure everyone was accounted for. Outside, guests and staff gathered on the sidewalk as sirens wailed in the distance. The night air was cool after the warmth of the restaurant, and Jasmine shivered slightly in her thin uniform shirt. "Is everyone okay?" she asked Anna, who was doing her own head count of her section. "I think so," Anna replied, her voice shaky. "Luis said it's not a big fire, just a flare-up in one of the fryers. But with all the alcohol in the kitchen..." Jasmine nodded, understanding the danger. She scanned the crowd, checking for any sign of distress among the guests. Her eyes found Thornton and his party standing a short distance away, looking more inconvenienced than concerned. As she watched, Thornton separated from his group and walked toward her. He stopped a few feet away, his expression still unreadable in the dim streetlight. "You're playing," he said without preamble. "It was exceptional." Jasmine blinked, surprised by the straightforward praise after his earlier mockery. "I misjudged you," he continued. It doesn't happen often. Before she could respond, a loud cheer went up from the staff. Mr. Chen had emerged from the restaurant looking relieved. All clear, he called out. The fire department says it's safe. Just a small kitchen fire, completely contained. People began to move back toward the entrance, retrieving abandoned drinks and dinner conversations. But Jasmine remained where she was, suddenly overwhelmed by everything that had happened in the last hour. The piano, the applause, Eleanor Reed's card, and now this strange almost apology from Thornton. Miss Williams? Mr. Chen approached, his normally composed face alight with excitement. A word, please. Thornton nodded to her and returned to his party, leaving Jasmine alone with the restaurant owner. That was truly remarkable, Mr. Chen said, his voice warm with genuine admiration. Why didn't you tell me you could play like that? Jasmine shrugged slightly. It never seemed relevant to serving tables. Mr. Chen laughed, the sound surprisingly youthful. Well, it's relevant now. I've made a decision. He gestured toward the restaurant. That piano has been decoration for too long. How would you feel about playing here on Friday and Saturday nights? Properly paid, of course. Jasmine stared at him, processing the offer. You mean, as a performer? Not a server? Both if you want, Mr. Chen replied. Or just the piano. We can discuss the details tomorrow. He paused, studying her face. Unless you're not interested? Jasmine looked down at Eleanor Reed's business card, still clutched in her hand, then back at the restaurant where she had worked for years. Through the windows, she could see life returning to normal inside. Servers clearing tables, diners settling their bills. But the piano stood in the corner, its lid still raised, waiting for her return. I'm interested, she said finally, surprised by the certainty in her voice. Very interested. The next morning felt strange to Jasmine. She woke before her alarm, her mind already racing with thoughts of pianos and business cards and unexpected opportunities. Her fingers tingled slightly as if remembering the feel of the keys beneath them. She flexed them, noticing a pleasant ache in muscles long unused. Her small apartment was quiet except for the distant rumble of early morning traffic. Sunlight filtered through thin curtains, casting warm patches on the worn carpet. On her dresser sat Eleanor Reed's business card, placed carefully next to a framed photo of her grandmother at the piano. Jasmine picked up the card, running her thumb over the embossed lettering. Eleanor Reed, Crescent Moon Productions. Below that, a phone number and email address. Such a small object to represent such an enormous possibility. Her phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. How was work last night? Boring as usual? Jasmine smiled at her sister's message. Zoe had no idea what had happened. How could she? Jasmine herself was still trying to process it all. Not exactly boring, she typed back. I'll call you later. There's a lot to tell. She set the phone down and moved to the kitchen to make coffee. Her mind drifted back to the events of the previous night. Thornton's challenge, the feel of the piano, the applause. Eleanor Reed appearing like some fairy godmother from a story. And then Mr. Chen's offer. It was almost too much to take in. The coffee machine gurgled and hissed, filling the small kitchen with a rich aroma. Jasmine leaned against the counter, cradling her mug in both hands. What should she do next? Call Eleanor Reed? Talk to Mr. Chen about the details of his offer? Both opportunities seemed to have appeared out of nowhere, like doors suddenly opening in a wall she'd thought solid. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Anna from the restaurant. Have you seen it? Anna asked without preamble, her voice bubbling with excitement. Seen what? Jasmine asked, confused. Oh my God, you haven't. Someone recorded you playing last night and posted it online. It's everywhere! Jasmine nearly dropped her coffee. What, who recorded it? I don't know, one of the customers, I guess. But Jasmine, it has thousands of views already. People are going crazy for it in the comments. Waitress forced to play piano shocks everyone with hidden talent. That kind of thing. A cold feeling settled in Jasmine's stomach. Anna, I wasn't forced. I know, Anna rushed on. That's just how they're spinning it. The point is, you're kind of famous right now. Mr. Chen's phone has been ringing all morning with people trying to make reservations for tonight. They all want to know if you'll be playing again. Jasmine sat down heavily at her small kitchen table. This is a lot. I know, right? Anyway, Mr. Chen wants to talk to you before your shift today. He said to come in early if you can. After hanging up, Jasmine immediately searched for the video. She found it easily. It had indeed been shared widely overnight. The footage was shaky at first. clearly taken by someone at a nearby table who had started recording during her performance of Chopin. But then it steadied, capturing her transition to Rhapsody in Blue and most of that performance. The video didn't show what had led up to her playing, only Thornton's dismissive comment about the Chopin piece being a parlor piece any second-year student could manage, and her response by playing Gershwin. Without context, it did indeed look like she had been somehow forced or pressured into performing. The comments below the video were overwhelmingly positive, praising her talent and technique. Several noted the contrast between her server's uniform and the sophistication of her playing. A few mentioned Thornton, calling him names for his condescending attitude. Jasmine closed the video, feeling strangely exposed. Last night had been intense but private, shared only with the people in the restaurant. Now thousands of strangers had witnessed her moment, interpreting it through their own lens without knowing the full story. She showered and dressed quickly, trying to prepare herself mentally for whatever awaited her at the restaurant. Before leaving, she hesitated by the phone, Eleanor Reed's card in her hand. Should she call now? What would she even say? After a moment's deliberation, she slipped the card into her pocket. She would talk to Mr. Chen first, understand his offer fully, and then decide her next step. Le Ciel looked different in the daytime. Without the evening's dim lighting and hushed atmosphere, it was just a restaurant, elegant but ordinary. The tables were being reset for lunch service, the floor freshly mopped. The piano sat in its corner, closed now, waiting. Mr. Chen was in his office on the phone when she arrived. He waved her in with a smile, gesturing for her to take a seat while he finished his call. Yes, she will be performing again, he was saying, his voice enthusiastic. This weekend, Friday and Saturday evenings. We're taking reservations now. He paused, listening. Yes, I understand completely. We'll hold your table. Thank you. He hung up and turned to Jasmine with a broad smile. That's the 5th call like that this morning. Everyone wants to hear you play. Jasmine shifted uncomfortably in her chair. I saw the video online. Mr. Chen nodded, his expression turning more serious. Yes, I've seen it too. Not the most accurate portrayal of what happened, perhaps, but he spread his hands. It has certainly created interest. I'm not sure how I feel about that, Jasmine admitted. It was a private moment that's been turned into some kind of spectacle. Mr. Chen leaned forward, his elbows on his desk. I understand your discomfort, but perhaps we can turn this unexpected attention into something positive. He pulled out a notepad. I'd like to formally offer you the position as our weekend pianist. Friday and Saturday evenings, 2 sets each night. We'd pay you 3 times your current hourly rate, plus you'd keep any tips from the performances. Jasmine's eyes widened at the figure. That would cover Zoe's tuition shortfall with money to spare. You wouldn't have to serve tables those nights, Mr. Chen continued. Just play. We'll arrange the dining room to better showcase the piano. Maybe add some subtle lighting. It was a generous offer, and the practical part of Jasmine's brain was already calculating what it would mean for her finances. But another part of her remembered Eleanor Reed's card still in her pocket. Can I think about it? She asked. Just until tomorrow? If Mr. Chen was disappointed by her hesitation, he didn't show it. Of course. Though I hope you'll say yes. You brought something special to Le Ciel last night. As Jasmine left his office, she nearly collided with Luis, the head chef. Piano girl, he exclaimed with a grin. The talk of the town. Are you going to abandon us in the kitchen to become a famous musician? Jasmine laughed despite herself. I don't think I'm in danger of becoming famous, Luis. That's not what social media says, he replied with a wink before continuing on his way. The lunch shift passed in a blur. Word had spread about the video, and several customers asked if she was the piano player from the video. Jasmine answered politely but briefly, uncomfortable with the attention. By mid-afternoon, she was exhausted from the constant questions and barely contained excitement of her co-workers. During her break, she stepped outside for some fresh air. The day had turned warm, the spring sun bright overhead. She sat on a bench near the restaurant's back entrance, finally pulling Eleanor Reed's card from her pocket. The decision shouldn't be this hard. Mr. Chen's offer was generous and certain. Whatever Eleanor Reed might propose was unknown, possibly leading nowhere. The sensible choice was obvious, and yet Jasmine dialed the number before she could talk herself out of it. Her heart pounded as the phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Crescent Moon Productions, this is Diane. Hello, Jasmine said, her voice steadier than she expected. My name is Jasmine Williams. Eleanor Reed gave me her card last night and asked me to call. Ah, yes, Ms. Williams. Ms. Reed mentioned you might call. She's in a meeting right now, but she's asked me to set up an appointment for you. Would tomorrow morning at 10 work for you? Jasmine quickly calculated. She wasn't scheduled at the restaurant until the dinner shift. Yes, that would be fine. Perfect. And the address is on the card. Bring any recordings you have of your performances, though. Ms. Reed mentioned she's already seen a video online. After hanging up, Jasmine sat still, processing. So Eleanor Reed had seen the viral video too. She wasn't sure if that was good or bad. When she returned to the restaurant, Raymond was waiting for her with an unusual expression, somewhere between irritated and impressed. You have a visitor, he said, jerking his head toward the dining room. Been waiting for half an hour. Wouldn't leave. Jasmine followed his gaze and froze. Richard Thornton sat at a corner table, wearing an expensive suit and checking his watch impatiently. When he spotted her, he straightened and gestured for her to join him. What is he doing here? Jasmine asked, tension creeping back into her shoulders. Raymond shrugged. Said he needed to speak with you specifically. I told him you were on break, but he insisted on waiting. Jasmine squared her shoulders and walked over to Thornton's table. She had already seen him at his worst. There was little he could do to intimidate her now. Mr. Thornton, she said coolly, what can I do for you? He gestured to the chair across from him. Please sit. This won't take long. Jasmine remained standing. I'm working. Thornton's mouth tightened slightly, but he nodded. Very well. I'll be brief. He pulled out a business card of his own and placed it on the table. I've seen the video from last night. It doesn't exactly paint me in the most flattering light. I had nothing to do with that video, Jasmine said quickly. I know. That's not why I'm here. He tapped the card. I'm on the board of the City Symphony. We have a foundation that provides scholarships to promising musicians who lack formal training. I'd like to recommend you for our program. Jasmine blinked, caught completely off guard. What? It's a good program. Provides training with top instructors, performance opportunities, networking, the kind of doors that should have been opened for you years ago. He paused, studying her face. Consider it an apology for my behavior last night. Jasmine picked up the card slowly, reading the elegant script. Thornton Development Group with his name and title below. On the back he had written another name and phone number. That's the foundation director, he explained. Tell her I sent you. Why are you doing this? Jasmine asked, genuinely confused by this turn of events. Thornton was quiet for a moment. I recognize talent when I see it, even when I'm initially mistaken about where I might find it. He stood straightening his jacket.
What happened last night reminded me of something I'd forgotten.
Music matters. It deserves to be nurtured wherever it's found. He nodded once. As close to a beau as a man like him was likely to come, and walked away, leaving Jasmine standing by the table with yet another business card in her hand. She looked across the restaurant to where the piano waited, its polished surface reflecting the afternoon light. 24 hours ago, it had been just another piece of furniture to dust during her side work. Now it had become a pivot point, changing the direction of her life in ways she was only beginning to understand. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from Zoe. You still haven't told me what happened last night. Call me. Jasmine smiled, tucking both business cards safely into her pocket. She had a lot to tell her sister. About music and opportunity. About doors that close and doors that open. About how sometimes the most unlikely people can change your life, even when they're trying to do the opposite. 3 months later, Jasmine stood backstage at the Riverside Concert Hall, her heart pounding as she listened to the murmur of the audience beyond the curtain. She smoothed down the front of her midnight blue dress, the first formal gown she had ever owned, and took a deep breath. Nervous? Asked a familiar voice. Jasmine turned to see Eleanor Reed approaching, elegant as always in a tailored black pantsuit. The producer had become a constant presence in her life since that first meeting 3 months ago, guiding her through what felt like a whirlwind transformation. Terrified, Jasmine admitted. What if I forget everything? What if I freeze? Eleanor smiled, the lines around her eyes crinkling. You won't. The music is part of you now, it always was. She reached out and adjusted one of the pins in Jasmine's hair. Besides, you've been practicing for months. Trust your preparation. The journey to this night had been intense. After meeting with Eleanor that morning after the viral video, things had moved quickly. The producer had listened to Jasmine play for nearly 2 hours, occasionally making notes but mostly just watching with those sharp, assessing eyes. At the end, she had offered Jasmine a development deal with Crescent Moon Productions. Not a recording contract yet, but professional guidance, studio time, and most importantly, a stipend that allowed her to reduce her hours at Le Ciel to focus on music. Mr. Chen had been surprisingly supportive when she explained the situation. "I'm disappointed not to have you full-time," he had said, "but I understand this is a rare opportunity." They had worked out an arrangement where she still played at the restaurant on Saturday nights, now billed as a special performance that consistently packed the dining room. As for Thornton's offer of the Symphony Foundation scholarship, Jasmine had accepted that as well. The foundation provided her with a distinguished piano teacher, Professor Walsh, who had been working with her twice weekly to refine her technique and expand her repertoire. 5 minutes. "Ms. Williams," called the stage manager, a young woman with a clipboard and headset. Jasmine nodded, her mouth suddenly dry. This showcase had been Eleanor's idea, a small but significant debut concert featuring Jasmine and 2 other emerging artists from Crescent Moon. The audience would include music critics, industry professionals, and potential sponsors. It wasn't Carnegie Hall, but it was a real stage, a real beginning. "Remember what we discussed," Eleanor said, her voice gentle but firm. "This isn't about proving anything to anyone. It's about sharing your gift." Jasmine smiled weakly. "Easy for you to say. You're not the one about to play in front of 300 people. 327, actually. We sold out." Eleanor squeezed her shoulder. "Including your sister. And a certain restaurant owner and his staff. And Thornton?" Jasmine asked, still surprised by the real estate developer's continued interest in her progress. "Front row with 3 members of the foundation board." Eleanor checked her watch. "I should get to my seat." "You'll be magnificent." As Eleanor walked away, Jasmine closed her eyes and thought back to that night at Le Ciel. How different her life had been just 3 months ago. The constant worry about bills, the late nights serving demanding customers, the piano dreams pushed aside for practical concerns, the financial stability that came with Eleanor's development deal in the foundation. Scholarship had allowed her to help Zoe with tuition without working herself to exhaustion. Her sister was thriving in her studies and had even started coming to Jasmine's practice sessions occasionally, rediscovering their shared love of music. 2 minutes, called the stage manager. Jasmine opened her eyes and rolled her shoulders, trying to release the tension. Professor Walsh had taught her breathing exercises for performance anxiety, and she worked through them now, feeling her heart rate slow slightly. The showcase had been carefully designed to highlight her unique style, a blend of classical training and jazz influences. She would open with Chopin, move to a Debussy piece, and finish with her own arrangement of Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue, the piece that had changed everything. The stage lights dimmed, and Jasmine heard the host announce her name. A round of applause followed, stronger than she had expected. Perhaps some people in the audience had seen the video that now had over 1 million views. Taking one final deep breath, she walked onto the stage. The spotlight found her immediately, warm against her skin. She made her way to the grand piano, a magnificent Steinway that made the one at Le Ciel look modest by comparison, and took her seat, adjusting the bench slightly. The audience fell silent as she positioned her hands above the keys. In that moment of perfect stillness, Jasmine allowed herself to scan the front row. There was Zoe beaming with pride, Mr. Chen and several staff members from the restaurant, Professor Walsh with his usual serious expression, and yes, Richard Thornton, sitting straight-backed between 2 older gentlemen who must be the foundation board members. Thornton met her gaze and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Not of permission or approval, but of acknowledgement, one musician recognizing another. Jasmine turned back to the piano and began to play. The Chopin Nocturne flowed from her fingers, the same piece she had played that night at Le Ciel, but different now, more confident, more polished under Professor Walsh's guidance. The notes filled the concert hall, reaching into every corner, telling their story of beauty and longing, As she played, memories floated through her mind, her grandmother patiently guiding her small hands on their old upright, the community center teacher who had recognized her potential and pushed her further, the competitions she had entered as a teenager, always coming close but never quite breaking through, the years of setting aside her music for more practical concerns, and finally, the unexpected moment when everything changed because a wealthy man had tried to humiliate her. The irony wasn't lost on her. Thornton had intended to mock her that night to put her in her place. Instead, he had inadvertently pushed her back toward her true path. Their relationship remained complicated. She hadn't quite forgiven his initial cruelty, and he still carried himself with the entitled air of someone used to power and deference. But they had developed a cautious mutual respect through their shared connection to music. As the Chopin piece ended, warm applause filled the hall. Jasmine allowed herself a small smile before transitioning to the Debussy. This piece was more technically challenging, requiring delicate touch and precise pedal work. She lost herself in its impressionistic patterns, the cascade of notes like water flowing over stones. When she finished the Debussy, the applause was even stronger. She could see Zoe in the front row clapping enthusiastically, her face shining with pride. Next to her, Eleanor nodded approvingly, and then it was time for the finale. Jasmine took a moment to center herself before launching into her personalized arrangement of Rhapsody in Blue. Professor Walsh had helped her adapt it for solo piano while maintaining its orchestral feel, and they had worked together to incorporate elements that showcased her unique interpretation. From the opening glissando, Jasmine could feel the audience's energy shift, leaning forward, fully engaged. This was the piece that had revealed her talent to the world, and she played it now with all the emotion and technical skill she possessed. The familiar notes were both a reminder of where she had come from and a declaration of where she was going. When she struck the final chords, the audience erupted. They rose to their feet, applause thundering through the hall. Jasmine stood from the piano bench, slightly dizzy with adrenaline and emotion, and bowed deeply. As she straightened, she caught sight of Thornton in the front row. Unlike the others, he wasn't clapping wildly. Instead, he stood with a thoughtful expression, his applause measured but sincere. Their eyes met briefly, and she saw something unexpected there. Not just respect, but a hint of wistfulness. She wondered suddenly about the year he had spent at Juilliard, before his father pulled him into the family business. What might have been different in his life if he had continued on that path? Backstage after the performance, Jasmine was surrounded by well-wishers. Zoe hugged her tightly, words tumbling out about how proud their grandmother would have been. Mr. Chen presented her with a bouquet of flowers from the restaurant staff. Professor Walsh offered brief, specific feedback on her technique, high praise from him. Eleanor appeared with a small group of people she introduced as executives from a recording label. They spoke enthusiastically about Jasmine's fresh approach and marketable blend of classical and jazz sensibilities. Business cards were exchanged, future meetings mentioned. When the crowd around her finally thinned, Jasmine found a quiet corner to catch her breath. The night had been overwhelming in the best possible way. She sat down, carefully arranging her gown, and closed her eyes for a moment. Ms. Williams. She looked up to find Richard Thornton standing a respectful distance away. Mr. Thornton, she acknowledged, rising to her feet. Please remain seated. I won't stay long. He clasped his hands behind his back. I simply wanted to offer my congratulations. Your performance was exceptional. Thank you, she said, studying his face. In the months since their first encounter, she had come to understand him a little better through their occasional interactions at foundation events. His arrogance masked a complicated relationship with his own abandoned musical ambitions. The foundation board was impressed, he continued. They've agreed to extend your scholarship for another year. That's very generous, Jasmine said, genuinely grateful despite her lingering complicated feelings toward him. Professor Walsh's teaching had been invaluable. Thornton nodded, then hesitated, seeming uncharacteristically uncertain. I also wanted to say something else. That night at Le Ciel, my behavior was inexcusable. Jasmine hadn't expected this. Thornton had never directly apologized before, though his actions had spoken of regret. I made assumptions based on, well, it doesn't matter what they were based on. They were wrong. He met her eyes directly. I'm sorry. The words hung between them, simple but significant. Thank you for saying that, Jasmine replied after a moment. And thank you for the scholarship. It's made a real difference, Thornton nodded once more, then turned to leave. At the last moment, he looked back. You know, I sometimes wonder what would have happened if someone had challenged me the way I challenged you that night. If someone had pushed me to prove myself at the piano instead of letting me walk away from it. Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving her with that unexpected glimpse into his regret. Eleanor found her a few minutes later, already talking about next steps, a small tour, recording sessions, media appearances. The future was suddenly full of possibilities that Jasmine was only beginning to comprehend. Later that night, after the reception had ended and the concert hall had emptied, Jasmine asked if she could return to the stage for a moment. The cleaning crew was just finishing up, but they nodded when she explained who she was. She walked out onto the empty stage, the house lights now up, revealing rows of vacant seats. The magnificent piano waited, silent and patient. Jasmine sat down at the bench one more time and placed her hands gently on the keys without pressing them. "Thank you," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was thanking the piano or music itself, or the strange twists of fate that had brought her to this moment. Perhaps all of them. She played a single chord, rich, resonant, full of promise, and let it fade slowly into the quiet of the empty hall. Then she stood, smoothed her dress, and walked confidently toward whatever would come next.